Welcome back to the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. We've got a bit of a creepy one for tonight because, while some of it may include just a little bit of haunting and the supernatural, the nastiest parts are all real, which is just all the better. So I hope you will enjoy what we do, and as we go through it all, please feel free to comment as much as you like. Whether you agree or disagree, we only do this channel purely for interest's sake and for learning and to possibly satisfy our curiosity about the strange. We don't promote nor deride anything. We merely record and learn. But with all of that said, we do have at least one rule, and that is don't be rude. Thank you for the follow there. I do appreciate it. And for those very kind gifts. That's very, very kind of you. So, we've done a lot of lives over the last year. Goodness gracious, it's been that long. And we've looked at creepy, strange, and occasionally terrifying things that may or may not exist, but tonight we're going to be starting with something that really did happen. And while there will be in due course a supernatural element, what we are beginning with is all genuine historical fact, which makes it just that much more interesting, and maybe says something just a little bit worrying about human nature. We shall see. How much do you know about medicine? We know that in the modern day, of course, we've got some wonderful medical skills and incredible medical ability. Many, many lives are saved on a daily basis due to the incredible abilities, skills, and science that doctors have. But you might not be quite so surprised to know that it certainly wasn't always the case. And tonight's interest is treating psychological illness through the ages, and perhaps on the supernatural side, what the result of that might be. So buckle up, because I think this one is going to be interesting. Now, in the modern day, of course, if you've ever studied psychology, as I in fact have, you will know that it is a very gentle science, one that leads those who are stressed and afflicted to a better state of life, that hopefully at least will bring peace and decent living. But in early times, I think it would be fair to say that was far from the case. And we are going to be looking through some of these interesting practices and some of the places where they happened. Tumi, welcome. Huge thanks for the share there. I do appreciate it. As you all know, we manage our channel based entirely on your good support. So every little bit helps, and I am very, very pleased at your support there. Lon, that is very kind of you. I do appreciate it greatly. And to everybody else listening in at the moment, remember that likes are for free and we do appreciate them. So the history of medical practice and psychological treatment evolved from, of all things, the supernatural. It evolved through biological, behavioral, and psychoanalytic approaches. Throughout history, these treatments have ranged from the truly inhumane, primitive, and worse, to sophisticated, evidence-based pharmacological and therapeutic practices. In ancient times, it was considered that if you were not entirely all there, then absolutely something else was. And with that in mind, the first thing to do, quite obviously, would be to exorcise you. Now, we very often have not got the right idea as to how exorcism goes. In the modern day, of course, it's a very sophisticated thing, and in many ways very kind. However, in past times that was not always the case, and if there was something in you that needed to be gotten out, it was done forcibly. Those to be exorcised were often beaten, tortured, and worse, for the good of your soul. And many strange practices went around. Huge thanks for those likes. It was known that it would be a demon inside you that was harming you. And the only possible solution, of course, was that it had to be driven out. Hey Jacob, welcome, welcome. The sheer amount of tortures done was said to be good and therefore healing. But of course, while it might save your soul, sometimes it didn't save the body. Things moved along and people started to realize that maybe it was a physical thing. And the Greek physician Hippocrates proposed that mental illness resulted from an imbalance of the four bodily humors: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. And as such, the proper way to treat it would be to treat the body, which was a step forward, perhaps. They would drain blood from the victim and apply all kinds of psychoactives in an attempt to cure what was wrong. And of course, as you can imagine, it was often less than effective. Early physical treatments involved bloodletting, purging, dietary changes, which you can translate to starvation diets and more. Purging, by the way, is to induce your being sick over and over again in an attempt to get out what is inside. Oh, by the way, if you hear any screams in the background, don't worry, it's quite all right. The kiddos are watching a horror movie, and it's a pretty good one, from what I've heard thus far. Kind of fitting. Now, in the Middle Ages to the 18th century, it was definitely a view that it was a religious problem. Prayer, pilgrimages, and even more exorcism to remove the demonic possession. Some were imprisoned in order to keep them away from society, chained to walls, often even treated as a spectacle. You could go to the mental asylum, and apparently it was quite popular to go and see the nutcases. There was a marked shift towards moral treatment, and people like Philippe Pinel started to advocate for maybe a bit more humane care, but it was not adopted for quite a long time. Things went bad. Luckily, around the 19th century, there was reform of the asylums, and people like Dorothea Dix helped establish state hospitals, sadly often overcrowded, but at least started an improvement. Treatments still included methods, however, like the tranquilizing chair, a chair that was designed so that the victim or patient was strapped in to reduce blood flow to the brain and therefore improve the problem. It kind of didn't, as you can imagine. Fortunately, by the 20th century, they discovered that mental illnesses are quite often, well, mental. And psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud introduced what was called talking therapy, which focused on treating mental distress by exploring repressed thoughts and feelings. Unfortunately, along with it, there was shock therapies, which they were less good than you might think. Insulin shock therapy, malaria therapy, and electroconvulsive therapy was used, which was not quite so good. In some cases, of course, psychosurgery was used. In short, you were given a lobotomy. The transorbital lobotomy was pioneered by Walter Freeman, who severed the nerves in the frontal lobe to treat severe psychiatric conditions, and sometimes those not so severe because it was convenience. XOXO, welcome, welcome. Now, eventually, cognitive behavioral therapy started becoming more dominant, evidence-based approach, focusing on modifying dysfunctional thinking and behavior. Technological advances and diagnostics like MRIs and so on, and criteria-based diagnosis started being used, which of course improved matters significantly. If you are a little bit depressed, you are no longer likely to receive a lobotomy, which is probably a win for the medical community. But nevertheless, let's consider the past. Now, in the past, people didn't have a lot of explanation, and so of course anybody with a psychological disorder or those exhibiting strange behavior were automatically possessed by demons, being punished by the gods for their sins. And following that logic, you got exorcisms, imprisonment, and in some extreme cases, even execution for your own good. Well, what we are talking about is the history of treatment of medical disorders, and specifically and especially mental disorders through history, and why perhaps in the past it was a little more robust than in the modern day. So we see that Wilhelm Graeziger, who lived in the 18th century, is remembered for initiating reforms of treatment on the mentally ill and introducing changes to the existing asylum system, which was a very good thing. He believed that integration of the mentally ill into society with just short-term hospitalization with close cooperation of natural support systems would work better. And of course, it proved that it was true. Psychiatry certainly has transformed in the modern ages, which is a very great thing. We know that in the past it was felt that those who had mental illnesses were driven insane by the moon. And of course, that's where we get the word lunatic from. Luna from the moon. Now, there were many discriminations against those with mental disorders. And of course, nowadays we don't have asylums at all. They have been replaced entirely by proper psychiatric hospitals, which is a very great thing from the perspective of the sufferer, as you can imagine. The state of things in what was quite literally just referred to as madhouses was pretty intense. You would basically be chained to a wall in a cell, in a situation often worse than even a prison, and treated abominably. There was no care for patients in any manner or form. The jump from supernatural theories to the next level was probably a downgrade. We know that the displeasure of the gods, eclipses, planetary gravitation, curses, and sin were what was originally seen as, and in fact it affected medicine a lot longer than people think. We know that the idea of the body being the problem, from the Greeks' examination of things, definitely helped in that it started people thinking towards better treatment, but it didn't work terribly well. It merely added further abuses which were terrifying. Things like, for example, trepanation. Essentially, it was understood that you had a demon in your head and it needed to be taken out, and therefore the best way to do it is to drill a hole in your skull. This was done for head injuries, which probably might have assisted in many of those, epilepsy where it would not, and all kinds of mental disorders which really and truly it wouldn't have helped at all. Trepanation lasted for many, many centuries as being the way to go. Around 2700 BC, Chinese medicine had the concept of the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative bodily forces, and it was an imbalance in these that caused mental and physical illnesses. As such, a harmonious life that allowed for proper balance was considered to be good for your health. This is quite possibly the most advanced of the old theories, and perhaps should have been listened to quicker. Mesopotamian and Egyptian papyri from around 1900 BC describe that mental illnesses, particularly in women, are the result of a wandering uterus. This we call hysteria, because the uterus, or the hysterios in Greek, was considered to be something that could come dislodged and therefore prevent proper functioning. And so when somebody goes a little bit crazy, they are considered hysterical and therefore need to be treated properly. As you can imagine, not quite accurate. Now, it was considered then that the best thing to do is get the uterus back into place. So the Egyptians and later the Greeks used somatogenic treatment of strong-smelling substances to guide it back to its proper place. So pleasant odors to lure and unpleasant ones to dispel. Now, this didn't work at all, so that didn't help. Madness among the Hebrews, for example, was considered to be a punishment by God. So the only way to affect it was not by medicine at all, but by repentance, confession of sins, and a lot more prayer, and possibly an exorcism when needed. Greek physicians rejected the supernatural explanations, which is probably a good thing. So around 400 BC, Hippocrates tried to separate superstition and religion from medicine, something which was only done in around, I would say, the time of the Reformation in the Western world, so much, much, much later, as you can imagine. So they felt that if you have the 4 essential bodily fluids and it's an imbalance, what you must do is rebalance them. So if you have too much blood, then we must take blood out of you. If you have too much phlegm, it must be removed from you. So mental illnesses came in 4 categories: epilepsy, mania, melancholia, and brain fever. And all of the symptoms were one or a combination of these. Mental illness was not shameful, and they should not be held accountable for their behavior, which, as you can imagine, again was a massive advance that was not shared by the rest of the world, unfortunately. He felt mentally ill people should be cared for at home by family members, and that the state shared no responsibility for them. But humorism, the ability to manage these things with the 4 humors, affected thinking all over the world, right up to the 19th century. We know that the famous Greek physician Galen, in around 130 AD, rejected the notion of a uterus having any animistic soul, and he agreed that the notion of imbalance of the 4 bodily fluids could cause mental illness. He also opened the door for the idea that psychological explanations might exist by allowing for the experience of psychological stress as a potential cause of anomaly. Galen's psychogenic theories were ignored for centuries. However, physicians attributed mental illness to physical causes for most of the time. Eventually, however, he was finally taken on, and, of course, as we know, proved quite correct. Now, by the late Middle Ages, economic and political turmoil threatened the power of the Roman Catholic Church, and between the 11th and 15th centuries, supernatural theories of mental disorders again came back in, fueled by natural disasters, plagues, famines, and all kinds of things that people said were brought by the devil. Therefore, any mental illness, naturally, was a result of the devil. So we went back quite strongly into the supernatural. By the beginning of the 13th century, the mentally ill, especially women, were persecuted as witches who were possessed. At the height of the witch hunts during the 15th through 17th centuries, with the Protestant Reformation having plunged Europe into religious strife, 2 Dominican monks wrote the Malleus Maleficarium. And as we well know, the ultimate manual for witch hunts, Johann Weyer and Reginald Scott tried to convince people in the mid-16th century that accursed witches were actually women with mental diseases and mental illnesses, not due to demonic possession, but faulty metabolism and disease. But the Church's Inquisition banned both of their writings, and we went with the witch theory, which did not decline until the 17th and 18th centuries, and more than 100,000 assumed witches had been burned at the stake. So clearly we didn't improve. We know that the testing of witches was extremely violent as well, stabbing large pins into you, half drowning you in water to see if you floated, and then eventually either hanging or burning. Hanging actually was the preferred method. Huge thanks for those likes there. Now, also during medieval times, a person with mental illness might be considered to be possessed by demons, and if it was, there were several forms of treatment to release the spirits from the individual. The most common treatment was exorcism, conducted by priests or other religious figures. Incantations and prayers were said over the body, and they may have been given certain medicinal drinks. Trepanning was also practiced during this time. They made a hole in your skull to release the spirits. Most people in this manner died in addition to the exorcism and trepanning, but they were at least saved. Other practices involved execution or imprisonment of the people with psychological disorders. Still others were left out on the streets, just abandoned because it was better, and they became homeless beggars. Generally speaking, most people who exhibited any strange behaviors were greatly misunderstood and treated very cruelly. The prevailing theory of psychopathology in earlier history was the idea that mental illness was the result of demonic possession by either an evil spirit or an evil god, because early beliefs incorrectly attributed all inexplicable things to deities deemed good or evil, and this got taken on in the Middle Ages very strongly. The convents through Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries reported hundreds of nuns falling into a state of frenzy in which the afflicted foamed at the mouth, screamed and convulsed. Sexually propositioned priests and confessed to having carnal relations with the devil or even Jesus Christ. Although today these cases would suggest a serious mental illness, at the time of the events it was just possession by the devils. Similarly, grievous fits by young girls are believed to have precipitated the witch panic. In New England in the 17th century, such beliefs in supernatural causes of mental illness was strongly held, and in some societies, even today, are still held. And we know that in certain cultures around the world, such as the Agukwa in Nigeria, were found to believe this in 2012, believe it or not. Now, between the 11th and 17th centuries, there was a really weird epidemic that swept across Europe that till today nobody can truly explain. Large groups of people would suddenly begin to dance. This compulsion to dance, known as dancing mania, sometimes even managed to affect thousands at a time. Historical accounts indicated that those afflicted would sometimes dance even though their feet were bruised and bloody, dancing for days or even weeks, screaming of terrible visions and begging priests and monks to save their souls. Welcome, Spooky. How are you?
Hi, good
Are
evening.
are you in fine and fabulous
Yes,
form?
yeah, okay.
Good.
Yeah, sorry,
All good, all good. So we're doing a bit of a creepy one tonight, and it's the medical treatment of those through psychiatry over the ages, and it's pretty harsh.
well, today's psychiatry is fucked up. They are mentally ill.
Well, it's a lot better today than it was, believe me.
Well, I prefer um, psych psychology in the 1960s and 70s. When you went to a psychologist and started crying, they would do something like this. I'm just a big baby. I'm just can grow some balls.
Well, one wonders if we have regressed. There is that to argue. And if
Well,
you're
people were
gonna.
tougher back then. Now they're all crybabies.
True, true. Well, you will have to see if you hold the same opinion at the end of tonight's live, because we have a number of interesting things to go through, and maybe we can pick the era that is the best one for being mentally disturbed.
Today is like, oh, you feel like a woman. You should cut your dick off.
Well, there is that. It certainly has moved on, shall we say. But on the other hand, at least I don't chain you to a wall in a dungeon, occasionally throw icy water onto you, and beat you.
They used to do that?
Oh,
I can
yes.
imagine.
Oh, absolutely. In extreme cases, if you didn't show evidence of being cured, they would execute you for your own good.
Yeah.
So
Well, some people still do.
there
I
is
mean, if you
that.
look in the Middle East,
Oh yes, and not just the Middle East. Several places around the world it is the case.
hmm,
So you are absolutely correct in that regard. But nevertheless, we are now in the between the 11th and 17th centuries, and there was a thing known as dance mania, which swept across Europe, where even up to thousands of people at a time would just start dancing. They would dance for days or even weeks, screaming of visions, begging priests to save their souls, even though their feet were literally bruised to bleeding. They would not stop dancing until eventually they would fall down and just collapse and sometimes die. Now, nobody knows what caused this mania. Some said that it was caused by ergot poisoning, which, for those of you who don't know, ergot is a kind of fungus that grows on wheat and is basically LSD. That's kind of what it is. So that would certainly send you round the bend. It's like a guaranteed bad trip. But others said it was some kind of spider poison, and as a result, these dancings were sometimes known as the tarantula, after, yes, a tarantula. Now, we know that the historian John Waller has provided a comprehensive explanation of dancing mania, that it was a combination of three factors: psychological distress, social contagion, and the inheld belief of supernatural forces that drove people over the edge. This is a theory, nothing more. There is no proof, because of course we can't test them these days. But we do know that it was an event all over Europe, and it was recorded in multiple places. Various disasters of the time included famine and plagues, and floods and stuff, but there was a lot of psychological distress, and also quite a lot of eating of what you can get because there's not enough around. So if the wheat is a bit manky, you eat it anyway, which means a bit of mold on it, too bad. So ergot poisoning could very much have contributed in that regard. But it was contagious. So one would start, others join in, until you had literally thousands all dancing away. The entranced individuals behaved in ritualistic manners, their thoughts and behavior shaped by their supernatural spiritual beliefs. Maybe this affected, of course. So in times of extreme physical and mental distress, it was something that just set people off. And when one started, many others carried on. So maybe a spontaneous social trance, perhaps, we don't know. But of course, it was considered that if that's going to be the case, into the jails with you for your own safety. Now, by the 18th century, anyone that was odd or unusual were placed in asylums. Asylums were institutions created for the specific purpose of housing anyone with a psychological disorder. But the focus was more about ostracizing them from society than it was for treating their disorders. So, as you can probably imagine, it didn't go so well. Often these people were kept in windowless dungeons, beaten, chained to the wall or to their beds, and there were no caregivers, there were jailers. In the late 1700s, the French physician Philippe Pinel argued that maybe if we gave them more humane treatment, it might help them. He said that they should be unchained and talked to. And he did that in La Salpêtrière in Paris in 1795. And surprise, surprise, patients benefited from his humane treatment, and many were actually able to leave the hospital. In the 19th century, Dorothea Dix led reform efforts for mental health care in the United States, and she investigated how those who were mentally ill and poor were cared for, and discovered a very underfunded and unregulated system that perpetuated extreme abuses. And we're going to get into some of those abuses because, after all, this is the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. Now, her efforts led to the creation of the first mental asylums in the United States, and what she did was really, really, really good. But because of people being people, the typical asylum was filthy, overcrowded, and offered little to no treatment, and kept people for decades. At Willard Psychiatric Center in upstate New York, for example, one treatment which was considered to be very effective was to submerge patients in ice-cold baths for long periods of time, occasionally pushing them under the water until they nearly drowned, allowing them up to breathe a little, and then doing it again. repeatedly. Electroshock treatment was also used, and the way the treatment was administered often broke the patient's backs. Doctors at Willard administered 1,443 shock treatments, according to records, called electroconvulsive treatment. And the therapy is apparently still used under anesthesia and with safeguards, but in a slightly different way. These ones were just with no anesthesia, given one great whack of electricity that caused their body to clench so hard, basically every muscle in your body clenching, that it literally broke their bones. So not a good way to do it. So the idea was to produce a total seizure. Controversy continues to this day as to whether or not it's worth doing. Many wards and rooms were so cold that a glass of water left in it would freeze. We know that Willard's doors were not closed until 1995, and conditions as described remained commonplace until well into the 20th century, which is pretty awful. European psychiatry in the 18th century and throughout the 19th century struggled between somatogenic and psychogenic explanations of mental illness, particularly hysteria, which came back into vogue, which apparently caused physical symptoms like blindness or paralysis with no apparent explanation. We know that Franz Mesmer, the famous fellow that induced what is basically hypnotism or mesmerism, influenced contemporary discoveries in electricity and attributed hysterical symptoms to imbalance in the universal magnetic fluid found in individuals rather than a wandering uterus. James Braid, who worked between 1795 and 1860, shifted this belief in mesmerism into hypnosis, and therefore proposed a psychogenic treatment for the removal of symptoms. At the time, the famed Salpêtrière Hospital neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot and Ambroise Auguste Lebaut and Hippolyte Bernheim of the Nancy School in France were engaged in a bitter battle over the best explanation for hysteria, and Charcot maintained that the hypnotic suggestibility underlying hysteria was a neurological condition, while Lebaut and Bernheim believed it was a general trait that women had because women are weird, basically. Now, we know that this was held as a possible explanation. We always pick the worst one, don't we? Right up to Sigmund Freud, who would resolve this dispute in favor of psychogenic explanation rather than a physiological, natural disorder that women have because they're women. And he took the hypnosis route further as well. And eventually this led to the cathartic method that became the precursor to psychoanalysis during the first half of the 20th century, which was quite nice because it didn't involve beating, torturing, or occasionally murdering your patient. Kind of a good idea, I think. It was only between 1856 and 1926 when German psychiatrist Eysenck came out with his Encyclopedia of Psychology, and it shows that he was the guy who started modern psychiatry and suggested that maybe if we look at mental illnesses from a symptomatic point of view in a clinical way, we might go further. And it turned out that his paradigm synthesis laid out what the different mental disorders actually were and how you might properly be able to treat them, which changed from the one-size-fits-all, throw them in a cell, chain them up and beat them, to actually seeing what's going on and maybe helping them, which was quite a serious change in psychiatry. He was, amongst other things, the co-discoverer of Alzheimer's, which was thought actually just to be a brain disease and nothing more, which may have led to the idea of medical models of mental illness, which may have helped quite a bit. But we are, after all, here not only to see how things moved, but look at what was done. Let's talk about a number of the practices from history. Now, you'll like this one, Spooky. Mental illness affects many in the United States, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and approximately 1 in 5 of American adults experience mental illness. Or they're little bitches, as you said. It's hard to say. Or we live in a society so unbelievably screwed up that we make people mentally ill. All of this is possible. We do know that the attitude towards mental health has improved in recent years, but the stigma still exists. CNN reported that 90% of Americans value mental and physical health equally, according to a 2015 survey, which is a good thing. And of course, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention was founded to deal with a lot of these problems, absolutely, and has been very effective for important issues in this regard. But this is not always the case. We've spoken of trepanation. Did you get that one, Spooky? Were you on when I spoke of that?
Trepanation,
can't remember. Trepanation, essentially, I drill a hole in your skull to get the ghosts out. This started about 7,000 years ago and lasted well into the 19th century. Nowadays, if it's ever done, it's usually done for important medical reasons where it does actually help, rather than just to let out the ghosts. We also have, as I previously mentioned, bloodletting and purging to balance your humours. The 4 humours need to be balanced, so blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. And each of these connects, as you probably have guessed, to the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And if you have too much of one, it will make you a little bit cooky in the head, and therefore we have to remove it from you, possibly forcibly. So bloodletting would balance your too much blood. Purging to get out bile of varying varieties. So they would basically give you an emetic, or in some cases, if not an emetic, something to, how can I say, induce extreme purging via the bottom end, which may or may not have been a good idea at all. So using the idea of the elemental effects, bleeding, purging, vomiting, and more, will cure your mental illness. These tactics were used to treat all kinds of things, from diabetes to asthma to cancer to cholera to smallpox and even a stroke. And often venesection, basically I slit your wrist for you, and leeches were used. Don't try this at home, children. It's not good for you. Speaking personally as a diabetic, I'm very glad not to have lived in this time. The other tactics which were used, which were considered to be very effective, was isolation, which was very, very good for you, and locking you up in an asylum. So you were placed for treatment in these things, but also it helped to remove your ugly ass from the view of your family and community, so they didn't have to feel so bad about you. They were kept in a situation where there was extreme overcrowding, poor sanitation, and occasionally what amounts pretty much to torture in an effort to deal with you. One such method was insulin coma therapy, which was introduced in 1927 and continued to the 1960s. With insulin coma therapy, you were basically put into a state of extremely low blood sugar so that you went into a coma, because they believed that large fluctuations in insulin levels would alter how the brain functioned. Insulin comas could last from 1 to 4 hours. I spent a week in a coma like that, and it was not fun. Mine was not induced. Patients received an insulin injection that caused them to lose consciousness after their blood sugar fell. Risks included prolonged coma when you just didn't wake up when they gave you glucose. The mortality rate was up to 10%, but that's okay. Then they also decided that it's a safer way if I give you electroconvulsive therapy. So instead of putting you in a coma, I give you a giant electric shock, which may or may not cause you to break your own back in the convulsions, but it's safer, in case you're wondering. Probably not. Then you had metrazole therapy. So seizures were induced using a stimulant medication. They began roughly a minute after the patient received the injection and could result in fractured bones, torn muscles, and other adverse effects. The therapy was administered several times a week. Eventually, the FDA stepped in 1982 and withdrew metrazole from use. While this treatment was dangerous and ineffective, seizure therapy was the precursor to electroconvulsive therapy that is still used for the treatment of severe depression, mania, and catatonia. This does not make me happy at all, but there you go. Of course, if all else failed and you really weren't responding, the next treatment would definitely fix you. We would just give you a lobotomy. So the now obsolete treatment actually won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1949. It was designed to disrupt the circuits of the brain, but did have a few side effects. So between the 1940s and 50s, lobotomies were pretty much prescribed in psychiatric cases deemed severe. You surgically cut or removed the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes of the brain. It could be completed in 5 minutes, and some patients experienced improvement of symptoms, but the treatment also introduced other problems because you basically became a semi-mobile vegetable. The idea was I took a hammer and chisel, pressed the chisel or spike in the side of one of your eyes and hammered it in. It was a procedure largely discontinued once people realized it wasn't that good an idea after all. Now today, of course, we don't do all that stuff, and we actually talk to people and try and treat them in a reasonably okay manner, which has better effects, to be fair. So another one which was apparently quite good that was used by the Egyptians, so you don't want to live in Egypt either, the best way to treat a mental illness is to pack the victim in animal dung. It works very, very well. Another interesting one which was used was the best way to cure you is to cause you to eat human flesh. And so you were made into a cannibal to cure yourself. Another one which was popular over time was what they called medical vampirism, drinking blood, human of course, which would restore vigor, especially if you could get it from somebody big, strong and healthy. The blood of gladiators was particularly preferred in Roman times. Another interesting thing, if you had serious toothache in ancient Egypt, mashed mice were applied. And if you had warts, dead mice in Elizabethan England. So mice as a cure. Another interesting one was the best way to treat cholera was a rectal enema of tobacco-infused water. If that sounds bad, believe me, it was. Dara, thank you so much for the rose. I do appreciate it. So yeah, some of these things are not good cures. We have the hydrotherapy cure, which sounds very scientific, until you realize that basically they felt that shock can cure madness. So you were submerged, dunked or showered in freezing cold water until you lost consciousness. Then they decided that, no, the way to know what's wrong with you is examining your tongue. And this became the diagnostic tool. You could find what was wrong with you by seeing what bit of the tongue was affected, what its color was, etc., etc. Not too sure how that worked. Then you had iron lungs. These were actually designed for people with polio, because if you get polio, your lungs are very weak and you do need assistance breathing at time. But they were then induced for other things to try to sustain life during respiratory paralysis, which didn't really work so well, as you can imagine. But they tried. But let's talk about the places themselves. What could you expect? So there's you, Spooky, diagnosed with minor epilepsy. And Mumsy says, we need to give you over to a doctor to give you a little bit of looking after. Here, over the different times, is what you might expect. In the Victorian times, the asylums were also known as houses of death. So, squalor was the norm, infection very, very common. So even London's St George's Hospital, now famous and important one, were filthy, infested with lice, mice, rats and other things, had very poor ventilation. Death rates were extremely high. Now, you think that Victorians were where it was bad? Well, in 1867, Iredale Hospital, and we will go into it more later, is so bad that currently it is known as haunted, and it only closed in 1997. We also have the Kingston Asylum in Jamaica, who used to enjoy tanking its patients, and basically that was one of the better cures. We know that if people were in asylums, then it was a free chance to do medical experiments on them to see how they did. So absolutely things went on kind of awfully. Let's just say that. Now, as we progress with these joys, let's talk about some of these places. So this is from the work of Lindsay Fitzharris, a medical historian. So 1825, visitors to St. George Hospital in London discovered mushrooms and maggots thriving in the damp sheets of a patient recovering from a compound fracture. The afflicted man, believing this to be the norm, had not complained, nor had any of his fellow bedmates, though the squalor especially noteworthy. Those unlucky enough to be admitted to this and other hospitals in the era were inured to these kind of horrors. Today we think the hospitals as an exemplar of sanitation, and they are, but back in the day, hospitals had a particular person known as the chief bug catcher, whose job it was to rid the mattresses of lice, and could be paid more than the surgeons of this time. Hospitals were breeding grounds for infection, provided only the most primitive facilities for the sick and dying, who were housed on wards with little ventilation and access to clean water. And as a result of it, if you went to hospital, 60 to 70% of the time you weren't coming out. They reeked of urine, vomit, and other bodily fluids. The smell so offensive that the staff sometimes walked around wearing face masks, not like today so that they don't hand on sickness, but so they didn't have to smell everything. Surgeons apparently were just as bad. Berkeley Moynihan, one of the first surgeons in England to use rubber gloves, recalled how his colleagues used to throw off their own jackets when entering the operating theatre, and don ancient smocks that were often stiff with dried liquids, only some of which were blood. So pretty grim. They had belonged to retired members of staff and were worn as badges of honor by their proud successors, as were many of the same surgical clothing and implements. So they carried with them the unmistakable rotting smell of decayed flesh and pus. And these were the surgeons. Delightful. In this period, it was safer to have surgery at home than in the hospital, where the mortality rates were 3 to 5 times higher than in domestic settings. Those who went under the knife did so as an absolute last resort and were usually mentally ill. Many either died or fought their way back to only partial health. Those unlucky enough to find themselves hospitalized would frequently fall prey to a host of infections, most of which were fatal, as in this era there were no antibiotics. Do not think anybody else used gloves. They all thought that one surgeon was a bit weird because he did. It gets worse. Most operating theatres were the same throughout this era. A stage, partially enclosed by a semicircular stand, rising one above the other to a skylight that illuminated the area below. On days where it was a bit dark, thick candles were used to illuminate. In the middle of the room was a wooden table stained with past butcheries, and not all patients were laid flat. Before the dawn of anaesthetics, many were sat upright in an elevated chair. This prevented them from bracing when the surgeon's knife started to dig in. All surgeries were done with no anaesthetics. They were also restrained, sometimes with leather straps. Under their feet, the floor was strewn with sawdust to soak up the fluids. On most days, the screams of those struggling under the knife mingled discordantly with the everyday noises of the street below, making it super creepy. Now, before germs and sepsis were ever understood, remedies for hospital squalor were hard to come by. Obstetrician James Simpson suggested an almost fatalistic approach to the practice. If cross-contamination could not be controlled, he argued, then hospitals should be periodically destroyed and rebuilt. Another surgeon named John Erickson voiced a similar view. Once it became an incurably pioneer-stricken, it's impossible to disinfect it by any known hygienic means, and it would be trying to disinfect an old cheese of maggots that have already generated in it. There's only one solution: demolish the entire thing. It's probably pretty fair. You're not first, Tsar, but you're welcome. How are you doing? Are you in fine and fabulous form? I do hope that you are. So, by the 1860s, the situation had reached critical mass. Surgery couldn't have been more dangerous. And then Joseph Lister stepped in, a rather melancholy young Quaker surgeon, and believe it or not, Listerine is named after him, by making the audacious claim that infection was caused, God help us, by germs that could be treated with antiseptics. I mean, what an idiot. And he changed the history of medicine forever. Toward the end of the 19th century, they had actually started cleaning hospitals, which probably was a good idea. I am glad that you are fine. How is your game going? Last time you came on, you were playing something particularly violent and exciting. I hope that it was good and worthwhile and lots of fun. Hey, Rix, I see you've joined us as well. Welcome, welcome. So, a rather interesting description from a patient of Kingston Lunatic Asylum, and it's from 1860s. I was seized by Antoinette Julian Burke, assisted by two of the lunatics of the asylum, Rosa Lewis and Eliza Scott, and one called Mary. I was stripped, my arms held behind me, my legs extended and forcibly separated from each other. I was plunged into the tank and kept under until all resistance on my part ceased. Their grasp was then relaxed. I arose to the surface and breathed as if it was my last. However, had I drawn my breath when I was again subjected to the same treatment, with the addition of having my head knocked against the sides of the tank and my poor body beaten and confused with blows till fear of murder prompted them to desist. So that's what it was like in the 1860s in Kingston Lunatic Asylum. She did try to tell the authorities, didn't manage to, and eventually was tanked so often that when the director did come to the hospital, she was unable to say anything to him because she was too sick to speak. And she only wrote all of these things when she finally managed to get out. She claimed a whole catalogue of physical and mental abuse, and they then thought, surely not. And an inquiry was held in 1861 which discovered that her accusations were all true and that the treatments were absolutely abominable. Whenever a, quote, female lunatic was contumacious or incurred the displeasure though only through the capricious or vindictive displeasure of the matron, she was ordered to be tanked. Furthermore, the commissioners came to the painful conclusion that death had on more than one occasion been accelerated, if not actually caused, by the tanking practice. The inflicted, as it was even on those in extreme old age, the sick and ill, and those far advanced in pregnancy. So as you can imagine, that going to an asylum was not good for your health. It was truly terrifying. And eventually things had to be done. In 1863, the Colonial Office carried out an empire-wide investigation which found that Kingston Hospital was not the only one. Many, many colonial hospitals and asylums, particularly those in the West Indies, were exactly the same, and they were reminiscent of treatment in Victorian eras. Many of these things were considered to be civilizing to the local WOG. So, yeah, as you can imagine, it was not considered to be a good thing. But as awful as these things were out there, they were done at home as well. So, yeah, not a terribly good thing to be considered mentally ill. Now, let's have a chat, as it were, about Ararat Lunatic Asylum, which became known as Uredale Hospital, in Victoria, in Australia. The lunatic asylum is now the home to Melbourne Polytechnic and is believed to be one of Australia's most haunted buildings as a result of treatments when it was a mental asylum. It opened in 1867 and was a functioning hospital until 1997. In Trove you can discover plenty of deaths connected to the asylum. Causes range from suspicious circumstances, old age, typhoid fever, poison, suicide, disease of the brain, and outright murder. During its operation, there were allegations of staff mistreating the patients, and in 1883, a former patient alleged that this brutal treatment resulted in the death of 2 other patients while they were there. The asylum was at the center of a mystery in 1898 when the asylum's woodcutter was found dead in a tent with a gunshot to his head. Joseph MacDonald appeared to have wounds consistent with pellets used for kangaroo hunting. A silent patient was an initial suspect but eventually cleared. A patient named Hewitt was found dead in the kitchen garden of the asylum in 1905. Staff realized that something was wrong when they noticed that his hat was floating on the surface of the dam. They think he drowned himself, but who's to say? They were giving electroconvulsive therapies, amongst other things. In 1909, a patient named Frank White was found dead in his room. He was trying to lift his bed, but fell backwards and broke his neck. He was only 25. In 1912, when the superintendent, Dr. William L. Mellin, was found dead, it was suspected of suicide by prussic acid poisoning. And yeah, that is not a good way to go, trust me. There were all kinds of things found that were used for their treatments, from purgatives, emetics, blistering agents, yes, something that will make your skin blister deliberately, and sedatives. The asylum was also affected by disease outbreaks, including the 1877 scarlet fever and typhoid. It's no surprise then that a supernatural presence is thought to be alive and well on the campus. Cramped quarters, poor management from staff, and being ostracized from society and being treated basically with torture, it's no surprise that the spirits of Fauna patients are still hanging around and are angry. So that's how you get ghosts. But we have more, after all. But before we go on to more, what do you think so far? Have you spotted an area where you would like to be a mental patient?
No.
Not yet. No. Well, in certain places in... I'm forgetting which time exactly it was considered a good idea that you should be treated with cocaine, because that will solve your problems. So when you went in sick, you did cocaine for that. I don't know if it helped, but hey. So Lon does not also yet...
It helps if you're depressed.
There is that, as long as you get a good trip. I believe a number of other opioids were also used at different times, as was appropriate and suitable. So, you know, do mushrooms for that. So, if you would like, Lon, you are welcome to join on the live. Just let me know. But yeah, so far it's not looking good for treatments. So we've basically established that initially asylums were not there to offer treatment or cure in any manner or form. They were entirely there to get people out of society so people didn't have to think about it. As certain responses from patients do show, a journalist, Nellie Bly, went undercover at the Blackwell Island Insane Asylum in New York in 1887. Not only was Bly committed without much examination at all, but conditions were truly cruel and harsh and inhumane. She says, "For crying, the nurses beat me with a broom handle and jumped up and down on me," said one patient to Bly. "They then tied my hands and feet and, throwing a sheet over my head, twisted it tightly around my throat so I could not scream. They then put me in a bathtub filled with iced water. They held me under until I gave up every hope and became senseless." Sounds pretty good? No? Not yet. We see, therefore, that mechanical restraints were popular. So asylums relied heavily on mechanical restraints, using straitjackets, manacles, waistcoats, and other leather wristlets, sometimes for hours or days at a time. Doctors claimed the restraints kept the patients safe, but as the asylums filled up, it was more a means of controlling overcrowded conditions. At the same time that asylums were on the rise, so too was psychiatry, a medical profession bent on proving their ability to treat anybody with a mental illness, and therefore all kinds of things were tried. They did give up on the idea of demonic possession, which is good. They still used humoral treatments from centuries before. So patients were purged, blistered, vomited, and bled, according to historians. Henry Cotton, superintendent of the New Jersey's Trenton State Hospital from 1907 to 1930, thought infected parts of the body led to mental illness. He focused on pulling teeth, which he thought caused madness. When that didn't work, presumably because the contaminated saliva could still make its way into the body, he began removing tonsils as well. He then took it a step further, removing parts of the stomach, small intestine, the appendix, the gallbladders, the thyroid glands, and parts of the colon, any place where it was thought infection could linger. Unsurprisingly, it was not a reliable cure, and there was a certain mortality rate. Inspired by the discovery that high fevers helped stop the symptoms of advanced syphilis, Julius Wagner, Jauregg, experimented with inducing fevers in people with schizophrenia by injecting them with malaria. The popular method even earned Wagner Jauregg the 1927 Nobel Prize in Psychology or Medicine, the first ever awarded for the field of psychiatry. Like Cotton's body part removal technique, introducing malaria had a very high mortality rate. About 15% of patients just died, and it didn't really work. Surprise, surprise. The shock therapies are still used today. By 1941, the US Public Health Survey said 72% of the country's 305 reporting public and private asylums were still using insulin coma therapy, not only for schizophrenia, but also for other types of madness. There was an interesting thing where they used shock therapy, provoking thrashing convulsions so violent they could literally break your back. In 1939, an X-ray study at the New York State Psychiatric Institute found that 43% of patients who had undergone the convulsion therapy experienced fractures in their vertebrae. You get blown up and you go unconscious, like something boils up, described one patient of the treatment. I felt every time I took that as if I was going to die. Beyond this terrifying experience, shock therapy also produced retrograde amnesia. Luckily, the FDA stepped in and said, listen, buddy, and stopped it. But it didn't stop. So psychiatric medicines did come in much later, and as we know, it's kind of gone a lot further forward, where it's good for the mental health and doesn't cause you to inadvertently die. So your choice of when to go into a psychiatric hospital probably would be today, where the worst that they do to you is talk to you, where they lead you through the trauma you've experienced in a nice environment with people who care for you and actually look after you, which is probably a lot better. So I'm going to say that maybe today is the best time to go to a psychiatric hospital. But as we see, it was not always the case, and we would not be the weird and the wonderful if we did not speak of weird and wonderful things. And for that, I say to you, what are the creepiest haunted hospitals in the world? Because as we discovered when we did our whole study on ghosts, it's trauma that makes a ghost. Extreme emotion. And for that reason, these are the places where you are going to get ghosts. Let's talk about the Belitz Heilslatten Hospital in Berlin. Standing 30 miles outside of Berlin, it is an enormous hospital complex, originally built as a sanatorium for those with tuberculosis, was used as a hospital during World War II to treat Nazis, and this is where young Adolf Hitler recovered after being wounded in World War I. You can go there and get some guided tours through it, and yeah, it's a little bit dodgy. It's got a very old-fashioned vibe with stained glass windows and all of those things that made great mansions beautiful, but now in full-blown decay. Rotting beds, empty rooms, and scattered rubbish. The sort of place that really and truly probably doesn't get too much vagrants going in, purely because even they know better. It is absolutely a place that echoes with the sad sighs of those who died of tuberculosis or from terrible injuries during the war. It is said that you can hear coughing when nobody else is there, and the cries of wounded soldiers. There is the odd smell of decay in the air that doesn't quite just come from the walls, and maybe from something more. People say that they've heard things, seen things, and they do say never, ever go there at night. But they are not the only ones. We have the Sai Ying Pun Psychiatric Hospital in Hong Kong, an interesting building built into the side of a hill, so that at one side the lowest floor has doors that open onto the street, and the other side is below ground. It's a very, very old building from around 1947, built in the colonial fashion when Hong Kong was run by the British. It was the lone mental hospital between 1947 to 1961, and all kinds of stories circulate. The crying woman, the footsteps that follow you, the devilish man that when you see them, he bursts into flames and vanish. thunderous knocking sounds from inside the building, decapitated spirits wandering the halls at night, and in some cases visitors just won't talk about what they saw. But don't worry, Ararat Lunatic Asylum in Australia is just as bad. Opened in 1867, it was the largest in all of Australia, with some of the most bizarre and horrifying methods of treatment. The faculty housed some of the most dangerous and violent psychotics in the world in its 130 years of service. And around 13,000 patients died on hospital grounds. While the facility closed in 1998, it reopened 3 years later as a campus for the Australian College of Wine. Ghost sightings remain frequent, so now they have two kinds of spirits in the building. Sorry. You can go there and get drunk and get terrified, but they do say that don't visit it at night. Then we have Berlin's zombie hospital, the Kinderkrankenhaus, a children's hospital, cruelly shut down in 1997 after 85 years of service to Berlin's newest arrivals. Punished repeatedly by vandals and weather, the hospital is idle and dormant. Burnt, damaged, and more, it is abandoned. But they do say, stay on the path, because they say that there are zombies in this hospital. And while, of course, nobody believes in such things, people don't go there very often for reasons, shall we say. Taunton State Hospital, Massachusetts, USA. 1854 it was built. And again, a terrifying historical account. Jane Toppin, a serial killer who confessed to have murdered at least 31 while working as a nurse, was one of the hospital's most infamous patients. Stories have emerged that some of the doctors and nurses working at Taunton conducted satanic rituals in the basement. Years later, both patients and doctors reported feeling an overwhelming sense of unease coming from the basement. Additional accounts have surfaced of a man crawling along the walls and watching the patients. It's one of these old-style hospitals that you look at it and you just know. Take the holy water when you go. Athens Mental Hospital in Ohio, USA, opened its doors in 1878, famed for the lobotomy procedure and the housing of violent criminals. Shrouded in mystery, patient information was kept confidential, impermissible to the outside world. More than 1,900 people died on the grounds, and their headstones marked only by numbers. If that isn't creepy enough, in 1978 a young female patient disappeared. Her body was later found in an abandoned ward. You can still see the stain on the floor where her corpse was found to this day. It's no longer in use. It's abandoned, and it should be, because what's out there is probably not something you want to share space with. The Kingsheath Psychiatric Hospital in New Zealand opened in 1932 and was operational right up until it shut down in 1999. There are scratch marks on the walls, bars on the windows, and stains on the floor. Hundreds and hundreds of ghost sightings have taken place there. The site, which incorporates a morgue, which you might wonder about, and a maximum security unit, long been the subject of folklore. According to reports, more nurses died than patients at the hospital. Staff suicide was so common on its grounds they had to keep watch. Since the closure, several death cases have been opened amid claims of negligence and abuse. And of course, paranormal investigators have said that there's all kinds of things going on in here. You're not allowed in, of course, anymore. Then you have the Old Changi Hospital in Singapore, built in 1935. It was one of the most haunted sites of all in Singapore. It initially served as an RAF hospital. It later functioned as a prison camp and torture facility for the Japanese secret police. Many apparitions have been spotted there, and bloodied Japanese soldiers seen moving around, children wandering the halls. Visitors came away with stories so frightening and tales of floating spirits that followed them even after they left. We also have the the Beechworth Lunatic Asylum in Australia, opened in 1867 to literally everyone. It proved to be the final stop for many for over a century, from rattling cellars to disembodied screams. Visitors have reported some bone-chilling tales of paranormal activity, and overall nearly 9,000 patients died at Beechworth, including a young girl who was mysteriously thrown out a window. Her death remains unsolved. You can go and visit it, but we don't advise it. Just saying. And with all of this, it seems that the creepiest places that were hospitals aren't what you think. One of the creepiest hospitals to visit is in Pripyat, where it was absolutely fine. There was nothing wrong with the hospital, but if you go there, you can go and see the maternity ward that is exactly the same as the day they abandoned it when Chernobyl had its meltdown, with the cots all in a row and little blankets and dollies. And somehow that's worse. And there's not much more than you can say about that. We know that when Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant had a meltdown in 2011, the nearby town was evacuated immediately, and there too you can see that not only are things all in disarray, but there are literally beds outside that were left abandoned as they pushed the patients out and then quickly loaded them into ambulances to take them away because, well, you just couldn't stay. Well, it gets worse. In 2010, in a section of a former DC General Hospital in Washington, a photographer found a container in an old room labeled babies that have been autopsied, human remains were later found in the hospital, and that's from now. After Katrina, St. Rita's nursing home was found to have been swamped. 35 of the patients drowned. There are places in what are currently war zones that were bombed. And if you go inside there, you can see coffins, stretchers, and more still coated with aged, dried blood that were evacuated as the bombs fell. Ultimately, there are a lot of creepy things out there, but no matter how creepy they all are, I think it would be fair to say the dead do far less creepy things than the living. And that is all that I have for you tonight on the very, very weird and not at all wonderful history of psychiatric treatment. Treatment so bad.
Have you ever seen a psychologist before?
I am a psychologist.
Okay, so you don't need it.
I get a mirror. But yes, I have. Part of my training included multiple visits to a psychologist because it's a requirement of the training. And in fact, to a medical doctor for a full medical with all of the checks, balances, blood takings, and all the rest as well. Yeah. So yes, I spent several months going to a psychologist because that was the rule. Glad to say, not the Victorian kind. Don't think I would have enjoyed that.
What that means.
Well, the Victorian ones chained you to a wall, beat you and threw ice water over you, starved you for your own good.
Okay. Sounds like fun.
Well, look, I suppose, to each their own. Maybe that would have been the best way forward. As an aside, amusingly, when they did the writing of the stories for the original Batman stories, Arkham Asylum was modeled on the old Victorian asylums. And that's why the Joker is so insane, because he was in there. He was fine going in. It was when he came out. So there you have it.
Yeah, I would think it would cure you, or at least you would pretend it cured you.
Oh, hell yes. I will definitely agree with that. I would absolutely guaranteed present all of the correct symptoms 100%, just in case. And the moment I was outside, I would run like fun.
So just be a crazy person pretending to be normal.
It's a lot safer. The history was indeed insane. And it always puts me in mind, Lon, of, I don't know, who here has read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series? The 5-part trilogy by Douglas Adams. Spooky, have you read it?
No, but I've seen the movie.
Okay, the movie was based on the first book. The third book, if I'm not mistaken, was So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. And in that book, there was a chap by the name of Wonko the Sane, who concluded that the problem with the entire world was that everybody was off their rocker. And so he built an inside-out asylum to put the entire world into the asylum. And he was the only sane person. And some days, I suspect he's right. But yes, the histories of what people have done can be really, really quite insane. You know the phrase, it was utter bedlam, when you refer to something being absolute chaos. We get it from the psychiatric hospital in London called Bedlam, because inside they just locked all the patients in together and it was utter chaos all the time. So it was so bad it's got into modern English as a verb. That's how crazy things were. So yeah, something to be feared, something to be avoided. I've never quite trusted psychiatry, and I was trained in it. So take it from me, I know.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. That would make me mad.
Yes, I wonder who really were the mad ones, if it was the patients or the doctors. I mean,
No, they need to keep you mad. That's how they get paid.
well, there's that, but go and look up what the tools were for performing a lobotomy surgery back in the day. You're literally talking a hammer and chisel. And not a small one either. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, it was not
To work
delicate.
with what you've got.
Well, I suppose I'm a little bit worried about it. It's like the history of exorcisms. Nowadays they pray over you and such. Back in the day they beat you until the demon came out and then executed you for the good of your soul. Which is how they treated lunatics in lunatic asylums for a long time as well, in case you're wondering. Same, but different. So absolutely, it was crazy, it was different, and it probably wasn't that good for your health. This is definitely one that I think the supernatural doesn't hold a candle to the real. It's far more terrifying. So yeah, until the next time when we will come back, 10 o'clock again. We do it every day but not on Sundays, so nothing tomorrow, back on Monday. 10 o'clock South African times. Hopefully you will enjoy. Hopefully you did enjoy. And thank you for being with me throughout this. Thanks to Lon, to Spooky, and to Rex. And in future, if you would like to join the live, Lon, you would be most welcome. Spooky, you know you're always welcome. Rex, you must comment if you want to join. You must comment so we know who you are. We've had terrible trolls in the past, and we absolutely don't allow just anybody on anymore because of it. But we try to keep things different, weird, wonderful, interesting, and we talk about all kinds of things, from ghosts to vampires to lunatic asylums to demons and more. And of course, I do know all about demons, as Spooky can tell you, because I am, after all, a good person. But until to the next time, thank you. Sleep deep, sleep sweet, but sleep with one eye open, because it's the people that you need to be worried about, not the ghosts. Good night.
Cool. Good night. Thanks for another exciting, informative live.
Thank you, sir. And remember, any questions you can bring back next time.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Cheers.
Ciao, ciao.